Hello, my name is Keith, and this is part of a series of videos providing program development opportunities for nonprofits. And these videos may be able to help you determine a better way to manage programs and avoid common mistakes. This video is about how to develop a volunteer income tax assistance program, otherwise known as VITA, and manage the VITA volunteers. If you like these videos, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. The Volunteer Income Tax Assistance VITA grant program is an IRS initiative designed to support free tax preparation service for the underserved through various partner organizations. This service helps low to moderate income individuals, persons with disabilities, the elderly, and limited English speakers file their taxes each year. IRS certified volunteers provide free basic income tax return preparation with electronic filing to qualified individuals. The IRS certified volunteers who provide tax counseling are often retired individuals associated with nonprofit organizations that receive grants from the IRS. The mission of the VITA TCA return preparation programs is to assist eligible taxpayers in satisfying their tax responsibilities by providing a free tax return preparation. To establish the greatest degree of public trust, volunteers are required to maintain the highest standards of ethical conduct and provide quality service. So if you want to get a VITA program started, the first thing you need to work on is building your financial support. So I would say begin working on obtaining that financial support to run a VITA program by first working on your IRS VITA grant before the application for the grant is even open. And I would say request about $30,000. Then identify corporate grants to help support your VITA program. Banks and credit unions are usually very strong supporters, and you could make individual requests of each of those corporations of maybe from $10,000 to $20,000. Sometimes those requests don't come in to that amount, but if you ask enough organizations, you'll have enough funds very quickly in order to operate. And then next, recruit your volunteer income tax assistant volunteers. Use Volunteer Match, Retired Senior Volunteer Program, otherwise called RSVP, the Senior Community Service Employment Program, otherwise called CSEP, hands-on and state and local government volunteer sites to identify potential volunteers. Before selecting the volunteers, you should also interview them individually to determine the best role for their participation. And there are many roles to choose from, and I'll get to that in a minute. The Volunteer Income Tax Assistance Volunteer Training. Training should consist of information relevant to the roles and responsibilities that you want your volunteers to perform. The tax season at our previous volunteer sites started the first week of February until April 15th. The next thing that you want to do is secure your volunteer income tax assistance locations. The locations should allow for multiple desks or tables with enough space between them to allow for privacy and security. They should be ADA compliant and provide enough room for clients in order to wait their turn. Like a large waiting area. Recommended sites are public libraries and workforce locations. Should be set locations on the calendar that can be advertised publicly for the entire tax season. You can also create separate one-off locations for specific groups, maybe a church group or a military organization, or whatever specific targeted group you want to work with. In all of your locations, you need to check for internet capability. You'll need to be able to run multiple computers from one router, so the internet capability needs to be strong. Need to complete and sign release of liability statements with those organizations. And once your set locations are in place, print volunteer income tax assistance RAC cards and My Free Taxes cards. Distribute the RAC cards and My Free Taxes cards at all the libraries, local social service agencies, and the workforce locations, and any other places that you identify that would attract the consumers that you want to come to your location. Volunteer income tax assistance training and certification process. All VITA volunteers must take and pass the IRS certification exams associated with their assigned roles. All VITA TCE volunteers, whether paid or unpaid, must complete the volunteer standards of conduct. certification and agree to adhere to the volunteer standards of conduct by signing Form 13615, Volunteer Standards of Conduct Agreement, prior to working at a VITA site. In addition, return preparers, quality reviewers, and VITA tax law instructors must certify in tax law prior to signing this form. This form is not valid until the site coordinator, sponsoring partner, instructor, or IRS contact confirms the volunteer's identity and signs and dates the form. They need to obtain and train the training and certification at the apps.irs.gov website and complete also level 2 volunteer background checks. To prepare for the Volunteer Income Tax Assistance Program, you want to revise your current and proposed budgets based on the funds that you did receive. Assign volunteers based on their certifications. As a VITA volunteer, an individual may choose several roles and responsibilities depending on what they'd like to do. Those roles include but are not limited to greeters, screeners, interpreters, IRS certified tax preparers, quality reviewers, site administrators, coordinator, instructor, tax coach, volunteer recruiter, computer specialist or troubleshooter, marketing and social media specialist, financial educator, or asset building coach. The bottom line is there's a role for anyone who wants to volunteer for VITA. Identify volunteers to set appointments and to gather information from consumers. A volunteer could receive calls at your agency on a specific extension. I recommend that you do not use your organization's main number, as the calls will clog up your daily business activity. Move laptops, printers, supplies, and materials that you need to each of your volunteer income tax assistance locations. It would be best to identify a storage area at the site for the duration of the tax season. Otherwise, you'll be hauling the equipment to every site every week. That can be quite burdensome. The requirements for the Volunteer Tax Assistance Program. As a volunteer in the VITA program, you must follow the quality site requirements. The purpose of the quality site requirements is to ensure quality and accuracy of return preparation and consistent operation of sites. There are 10 quality site requirements. First of all, a certification pertains to new volunteer certification requirements and requirements for returning volunteers. This requirement stresses the importance of answering, instructing, preparing, and conducting all actions pertaining to taxes. All IRS tax law certified volunteers preparers are required to prepare tax returns that are within the scope of the VITA program. Out-of-scope returns should be identified early and referred to professional tax preparers. IRS preparing can only prepare taxes within their certification level. Tax instructors must certify at the advanced level or higher. Intake, interview, and quality review process. All sites are required to use Form 13614-C intake, interview, and quality review sheet for every tax return prepared by an IRS tax law certified volunteer. All IRS tax law certified volunteer preparers are required to complete the entire intake and interview process when preparing tax returns. While completing the intake and interview process, verify that the tax return is within the scope of the VITA program and the volunteer certification level. Photo ID and taxpayer ID numbers. Coordinators are required to have a process in place to confirm the taxpayer identities. This process must include using acceptable documents to confirm taxpayer identities by reviewing photo identification for primary and secondary taxpayers, and Social Security number or individual taxpayer identification numbers for everyone listed on the tax return. Volunteers must validate taxpayers' identities and taxpayer identification numbers prior to preparing the tax return. Reference materials. All sites are required to have in paper or electronic form the following reference materials available for use by VITA volunteers. Publication 4012, Volunteer Resource Guide. Publication 17, Your Federal Income Tax for Individuals. Publication 4299, Privacy, Confidentiality, and Civil Rights, a Public Trust, Volunteer Tax Alerts, and Quality Site Requirement Alerts. or cyber tax alerts issued by TaxAid. The use of reference material is an important key in producing an accurate tax return. Having the key tax law reference materials available helps to foster the use of these resources and thus minimizes return errors. Volunteer agreement. All volunteers, coordinators, certified volunteer preparers, quality reviewers, greeters, screeners, client facilitators, etc. are required to complete the Volunteer Standards of Conduct certification annually. This includes signing and dating Form 13615 Volunteer Standards of Conduct Agreement for VITA programs, agreeing to follow the Volunteer Standards of Conduct. In addition, Form 13615 is required to be certified, signed, and dated by the partner's approving official. This approving official can be the coordinator, sponsoring partner, official, instructor, or IRS contact as designated by the partner. This validates the partner's approving official has verified the volunteer's identity, the volunteer has completed the required IRS certification tests, and the volunteer has signed and dated Form 13615 before the volunteer is permitted to work at the site. Timely filing. All coordinators are required to have a process in place to ensure every tax return is electronically filed or delivered to the taxpayer in a timely manner. Civil Rights. Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, information is required to be displayed or provided to taxpayers at VITA sites at the first point of contact. This is usually at the intake or greeter station. The taxpayer must have access to the information even if a tax return is not completed. These posters provide volunteers and taxpayers with contact information to report discriminatory treatment. Site identification number. It is critical that the correct site identification number, SIDN, is reported on all tax returns prepared by VITA sites. E-file administrators should set tax software defaults to ensure the correct SIDN automatically appears on each tax return. Partners or coordinators should work with their RM to ensure that they're using the correct SIDN. Electronic filing identification numbers. The correct electronic filing identification numbers is required to be used on every tax return prepared. All applicants are required to use the online IRS e-file application process located in the e-services to apply for an EFIN or update an application. A separate EFIN is required for each physical location. And security. All security, privacy, and confidentiality guidelines outlined in Publication 4299, Privacy, Confidentiality, and Civil Rights, a Public Trust, are required to be followed. To help prevent identity theft behavior at VITA sites, IRS certified volunteers are required to wear or display name identification to the taxpayers they assist, including a work ID, IRS name badge, TaxAid name badge, or similar product. At a minimum, this must include the first name and the first letter of the last name. Form 14509 Volunteer ID Insert is an optional product developed for volunteers to display their identity. The ID badge does not need to be updated annually unless the information on the ID badge has changed. However, wearing identification badges does not serve as proof of your certification. VITA volunteers must not accept payment, solicit donations, or accept refund payments for federal or state tax return preparation from customers. Volunteers must not solicit business from taxpayers you assist or use the knowledge you gained, their information about them, for any direct or indirect personal benefit for you or any other specific individual. They cannot knowingly prepare false returns. They cannot engage in criminal, infamous, dishonest, notoriously disgraceful conduct, or any other conduct deemed to have negative effect on the VITA programs. And they must treat all taxpayers in a professional, courteous, and respectful manner. Usually there's a long line of clients waiting for their tax returns to be completed, and it is a free service to them. They may become aggravated and impatient. To avoid these issues, you may want to set up some sites as appointments-only sites. Any clients who become verbally or physically aggressive need to be referred to the site coordinator for resolution. If the client remains verbally or physically aggressive, the coordinator or program director can refuse to provide services. And then at the end of your tax season, the Volunteer Income Tax Assistance Program should have a volunteer celebration to provide a celebration luncheon for the volunteers, provide statistics from the season, including the number of returns completed, the amount of money saved by the consumer, the return on investment for the community at large, the number of volunteers, the total number of EITC received, and the total amount of refunds received. Also provide certificates and identify milestones for returning volunteers like 5 years, 10 years, etc. Thank you. If you like these videos, please click subscribe.